Yo, yo, yo. Hey, everybody. How you doing? Uh, Hope I'm not um, echoing. So today, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go. Um, First off, let me welcome everybody to the Erudition Network. Name is Eddie Phillips. I am the CEO of Erudition Network, and today is another one of our um, interactive uh, Black History and knowledge sessions. Sent out a, a thing for everybody to come in a little bit earlier, and I thank everyone who responded. So, I'll give you everybody a little bit of time to come on and see who can actually come on today. So, this session is designed to go over history that we don't often cover or that is shared in our history books. Just like last week with this session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put a link. And I don't know why I'm on here twice, so you guys have to forgive me. All right, there it is. It's a little strange. Double Eddie. But what we try to do on this show, getting back to being serious, is to go over history that is not actually always covered. And today, I'm going to do that by actually covering something that has been in the news recently. Many of you may have seen that the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise, was assassinated on the 7th of this month. And a attack on him that also left his wife hospitalized. And as I was talking about this, a lot of people that I know were like, how does, they were concerned, but they didn't really know how this related to us today, to Americans, for Americans. And so I wanted to touch on that. I wanted to get on and talk about that. Why am I alone? No, I'm here with you. I'm here with you. So hopefully people will start to come on. But I thank you for joining us, for logging on and getting on here. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. So Moise was assassinated last week, and when this happened, I started to think about our history as it pertains to Haiti, the American history, African American history that is connected tissue to Haiti. So in order to do that, we have to go back to the past and think about I guess the best place to go would be the Haitian Revolution, and looking at how that took place and covering some history as in that, so we can better understand what that revolution really did. The Haitian Revolution is often lauded because it is the first time in our history of slavery, African Americans or Blacks, slaves, or the slaves of that era who rose up in revolt to end their bondage. It was also a multicultural revolution. And many times that's left out. We don't look at the fact that not only did blacks participate in that, but there were also mulattoes, there were Spanish, there were some French who also assisted the slaves in throwing off their chains. This revolution happened started in 1791. It didn't really end until early 1800, about 1804. But what it did is it broke the hold of Europeans on the slave trade going into what was then Hispaniola. And it made whites have to accept, at least some, have to accept that blacks were intelligent, that they were human, that they had value beyond just property. And so when we look at the Haitian Revolution, and we look at men like Toussaint Louverture, who is lauded as an emerging hero and leader of that revolution, bonds were taken off. But there are things about the Haitian Revolution that we don't really cover in our history. What is not often covered or said is that though there was a revolution, and though Haiti was allowed to declare its independence, as with any country, just as with America and within our revolution, international politics requires that someone recognize you as a sovereign or independent nation. And in the history of Haiti, that has always been a problem, right? Because what has happened is that even though we lauded, and I've seen documentaries, I've seen professors spend a lot of time talking about the Haitian Revolution and lauding it and saying all of these things about it. One of the things that is never said is the indemnity. That is never really brought up. And the indemnity, right, which they say is controversial, is not really controversial. And it is one of the reasons why I bring up Haiti, and we talk about with Jovenel Moise's assassination recently. You know, there was another assassination of a Haitian president that happened in 1915, but we're going to get into that in a little bit. But staying on the subject of the revolution, when Haiti declared that it was independent, that it was free, it was a valuable land and place in history. Most people don't know that there were almost 500,000 slaves in Haiti. And between the time of the late 1600s until the early 1800s, after the revolution, you are talking about colonists and people who had grown this slave trade in Haiti. Remember that they had killed off the indigenous people of Haiti. And so the African was bought in to work in the fields and to grow the sugarcane and grow the crops and to be the slave over there. So they bought in an estimated almost 500,000 slaves. That is a large amount of people. And they found that the slaves that they bought over from Africa, they could last longer in Haiti. Now, we've already talked about that in previous lessons, that what happened was that Africans weren't new to Hispaniola or to Haiti as we call it today. They had been over there. They had been coming over there for centuries. And so they knew that they could work over there, but they found that they could work in those arduous conditions and their death rates were low. But at the time, the Haitian commerce was like almost 40% of French trade. It was a huge part of French wealth. And so the French did not want to let that go. And that's why it took that bloody revolution in order for it to end. But They did not want to allow these people to be freed um, easily. So what they did was they went in and they put a debt on them. In other words, the French filed suit against the Haitians and said, wait a minute. Yeah, you are free. However, you owe us for the land, for everything that you took from us. And we must also remember that at the time of this, right, the French were going through their own revolution. So think about this. You had people who called themselves patriots and working for the betterment of the common man, even though we learned in the French Revolution that that was not always the case. These people who wanted to push the estate to allow these folks, the common man, to not be looked down, that did not feed over to the Haitians. And so they put a grievance against Haiti to the other nations of the world at the time. Now, that is an important thing for us to remember and how America plays in this. So when the French realized that they could no longer make money off the slaves that they were sending to Hispaniola, and then eventually sending some up to the Americas, they cut off Haiti. They decided, as well as other nations, even America, they decided that they would not do business with Haiti. They would not recognize it as a sovereign country. And so in order to do that, trade stopped. And so they went to the Americas. That, ladies and gentlemen, increased the American wealth in the slave trade. When you look at South Carolina, when you look at those southern states that were getting in slaves after the Haitian independence, and there was another part of this too, because even though slavery had been going on in the Americas, what they did not want is they didn't want the idea of revolution seeping into the consciousness of the African American slave over here. That's how we play into this as African American people. And so what they did was they increased the slave trade here in America. And it brought an economic growth to America that it had not had, because Haiti was getting a lot of the profit for the French. What that did was it made America more profitable. It raised America to a more significant world power. Now, one part of that history, and I have seen it said in some places, is Thomas Jefferson. Now, many of you know Thomas Jefferson as the writer of Declaration of Independence. You know him as this founding father. And even though some of that gravitas has been taken away from Jefferson, I'm going to go further and taking some of that gravitas away. John Adams, who was the second president of the United States, had actually tried to work and send aid and help with Haiti as a emerging country. He didn't necessarily recognize it as a nation, but he did try to help. Thomas Jefferson, cut that aid off. Now, I make this point because Thomas Jefferson himself had been over in France before the French Revolution. He is quoted as being this man who lauded the idea of independence, but yet he wanted to starve that nation and drive it to be back under the arms and the hands of the French. Now, Jefferson also is quoted many times in history as not necessarily disliking African Americans or Africans or the descendants of the slave, but he also did not think that we were an intellectual people. And so his desire to push the savage back into the hands of France, that was premeditation, and this is what he did. So what he did is he did not do any trade with Haiti. The British also cut off Haiti. And when the Haitians, who thought that the British would be on their side, right, tried to get the British to align with them, the British declined. Now, what's so striking about that is that the British had already recognized other nations that were south. They had, at this time, if you look at about in the middle, the early 1800s, or probably around 1825, they recognized the Colombia, Mexico, what we know as Colombia, Mexico, and other parts of the Americas that were under Mexican rule, but they did not recognize Haiti. And so as a consequence, Haiti became in debt. And they had to go to the people who had freed them, the French. They had to go back to the French. As a matter of fact, history doesn't say that. History says that the French government commanded the Haitians to come to court. And then they demanded that they be paid. That they be paid for the people and the property that had been freed. They demanded that because even though they had fought for their independence, in order for France, who eventually recognized them as a nation, for France to recognize them as a nation, that they would have to pay them money. Because France understood the value of Haiti. Now, many of you who may have some Haitian descent or know some of this history, this may not be a surprise to you. But a lot of us don't know that. We are given the idea of the Haitian Revolution as a shining moment, and it is in history. We are told we have had presidents who have called Haiti a S-hole country. We have had presidents who have tried over and over and over again to pull Haiti in to the Americas and to our country, almost to a point of colonialization of Haiti. But when we see assassinations, when we see coups, the earthquake in 2010 in Haiti, many people say, oh, Haiti has always been a dirt ball, a crap place. Why is that? Because Haiti is one of the few places, if not the only places in the world, who has a history where slaves and people rose up to fight against oppression. And one of the things that you will know in history is that supremacy and oppression have a long memory. They have a long memory. When we look at Haiti, and one of the other things that I wanted to talk about in this lesson today is I wanted to talk about Woodrow Wilson. Now, for this part, right, we've been on about 19 minutes. I want some of you all, the few who are on here today, I'm gonna I'm gonna open this up completely. You may either send a message through Facebook, YouTube, however you're connecting, or I'm going to invite openly in the chat anyone who wants to come on and share or talk. So I just put that in the chat. If you want to come and connect to the studio, please feel free. Just click that link. And if you have something to say, you'll be on. You don't have to share your mic. I mean, your camera. It could just be a mic. But if you have something to say, I will gladly let you come on and we can have that discussion. But getting back to what I was saying about Woodrow Wilson, a lot of people praise Woodrow Wilson. They talk about him in such a fabulous light, and they do this thing where where Wilson is almost as if like he is a hero. And if you know anything about Woodrow Wilson's presidency, you know that that is not absolutely the truth. And we're going to kind of cover some of that right now. We just talked about the Haitian Revolution. We talked about how the French came and demanded money from the Haitians for their own independence. As crazy as that sounds. But what is not known is that it wasn't up until the early 50s that Haiti had actually paid off their debt. Yeah, I said that. 1950s, early 1950s, late 1940s. And that debt was paid to the Americas, to what we now know as what is that bank? Citibank. They are the ones who collected on the Haitian debt for 120 something years. All of that money. And why is that? It's because the government, the United States government, decided to get involved, and we put money into Haiti. Because as I just said earlier, it was an attempt to colonialize South America and these South American governments. So we see as we go through our history that happened. Under Wilson, there were many nations, South American nations. Mexico was invaded in 1914, Haiti in 1915, the Dominican Republic in 1916. And majority of it, more times than not, was because of Woodrow Wilson. When we look at Cuba in 1917, we look at Panama in 1918, Wilson continually invaded the South American nations and put money and time and American troops down there in an attempt to take over those governments, to not make them a state necessarily, but to align them with the American mentality. Now, this is important to know for African Americans because around this time, if you look at the earlier episodes of Erudition, we've talked about what was going on from 1910 to 1920. We know that there were racial issues all throughout the country because of what Woodrow Wilson was doing. We know that there were lynchings and massacres that happened in America because of what Wilson was doing. Wilson was a person who was anti-immigration. He did not like anybody to be known as any kind of from African-American, Italian-American, anybody who had that caveat, he saw you as a traitor. That is not me making it up. This is from Wilson's own quotes. He did not believe that some people were civilized. He saw you as a savage, as a danger. Throughout his administration, he focused heavily on keeping people in that role as something to be controlled. He took on powers to go to war at the time with Russia, not the Russia that you think. Wilson aligned himself with the white opposing Russian government. So I want to tell you, I heard Joe Biden say that Donald Trump was our most racist president? No. I would argue that Woodrow Wilson was one of our most racist presidents. Woodrow Wilson's actions still have effect on us today. The Vietnam War can also be pushed onto the table of Woodrow Wilson. A young Ho Chi Minh asked Wilson at Versailles to stand with them for self-determination in Vietnam. Wilson laughed at him. We have to understand the actions that have been put across from America into places like Haiti. We have to understand that it was motivated, and I know many people, they hate to hear this, but history shows it, by isms, by race, by discrimination. This is the same Woodrow Wilson who stood in the White House at the screening of Birth of a Nation and praised it. He is the same classmate of Thomas Dixon, the man who wrote The Klansman that was later made into Birth of a Nation. This is the same Woodrow Wilson who wrote a 2-volume set of books about Reconstruction that have been seen now modernly as completely racist. But Wilson had his eyes on Haiti. When you read about our history, it is accurate to portray that Wilson wanted to take over. And a lot of the people who were put into power, the Duvaliers, who later came in the 1950s, the Batista, the Trujillo, all of these despots that we have been told about in our history books, and are told that the Republicans from Reagan to Bush fought against. All of these things that happened that laid up that can allow presidents to call Haiti a S-hole country can be laid in the early 1900s. But that is not what we're taught in our history. That is not what is said. Sean Anthony said Wilson wanted money, land, and power, not military or strength, but power over races, and made an enemy with anyone with different opinions. That is true. That is true. But what he also did was he tried to bring people under his design by offering money. In you all's history books, a lot of times you see people talk about how Wilson started this good neighbor project and how he wanted to reach and extend a hand. That is the way we're told about it in history. But that's not the case. That's not the case. They say that Wilson wanted to build friendships. That's not the case. They say that it was difficult and he had to put down a iron hand because the governments rebelled and it was difficult. But that wasn't the case either. When we get into the idea of what was called the Banana Wars, something that is not really talked about also, but that was a series of conflicts in which we sent troops down to these countries: Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, Panama, Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, Mexico. And we didn't pull those troops out of there until Roosevelt came in just before World War II. And it was done so that we could try to bring them in alignment with America. Wilson wasn't the only one that did that. Theodore Roosevelt, and trying to build the Panama Canal, he initiated a conflict to make sure that the Panamanians were able to call for their independence in order to build the Panama Canal. The value of South America is known to America. And only us who are foolish believe that there is no money in it. Remember, I told you debt was being paid up until the early 50s. They knew the value. They knew the value. But many of us, we think of Haiti and some of these countries as dirt holes. And then we wonder why people are fleeing them. Because we have put so much, I say America, our government, rather it be Democrat or Republican, I'm not blaming any political state, they got involved down there. They did things to initiate these wars and these actions and these conflicts, while at the same time pulling money. When you look at the amount of money that was sent down in 2010 after the Haitian earthquake, and everyone talked about how much money was being given worldwide, and how many people said, well, with all the money that was being given, there's nothing going on in Haiti. And then we wonder about the corruption. Well, that has been a staple of that country ever since we've started to pay off their debt. Ever since we went in, I say European governments, American governments went in and started to get into their politics. When you see presidents being killed in Haiti, it should not be shocking. Tony said, does that have implications of using the military might to enforce it into international waters and cash in American waters? Yeah. That's a simple answer. Yes. We always use military might. And I tell you this as a military person, as a veteran. We send military down there to win hearts and minds. A lot of it is not the military itself being violent towards people. We're sent down there to try to win hearts and minds. We used to be sent down there to knock heads back in those early days, but we go down there to win hearts and minds. But there's a political move. They did so to attempt to dilute the evil he's doing. I guess you're talking about Wilson. Does anybody have anything that they want to add to this? I can keep going. This is an in-depth lesson because there's so many parts to this that have to be talked about. Because we want to really understand how important it is, how important Haiti is, because I get tired of hearing about how these nations are just crap, as if there is no inciting incident that got these places to be in the situation that they're in. If it were not for the governments like the Haiti government, Napoleon and the French would not have had the wealth that they had to change the whole structure. And this is not Eddie saying this. This is hundreds and thousands of historians who give credit to Napoleon for reshaping Europe. Where do you think that money came from? That wealth came from? The backs of those slaves in Hispaniola. And when we say that the Haitians revolted, how many of you knew that the Haitians were paying for their revolution? to Citibank. Consider that. A revolution that started in 1791 and ended in 1804 wasn't paid for until 1950. But let's not say paid for. The debt was transferred over to someone else, some other nation that did not have the ideas or the care of Haitian people or Black people. And if you don't believe that, look at what was happening within our own United States, even into the 1950s. So getting back to Jovenel Moïse, he comes to power. There is disagreement. But this is the thing, from all indications, and it could later change, from all indications, he was killed and murdered by mercenaries. People outside of that country who were hired to come in and kill. Many of us don't know too much about Haiti. I remember being a young teenager and learning about Papa Doc and the devoids and how they came to power and they dominated these people and they stole money. They stole money. When Reagan came to power as president, that was one of the major things that he was confronted in doing was getting Papa Doc's son out of office, out of control of Haiti. It was only with the American pressure to remove that family of dictators. And I would like to say that it was done for humanitarian purposes, but it was not. It was done by all history because Haitians were showing up on the shores or dying in American waterways, and it was angering American people because they were trying to escape, just as we see now people traveling from South America trying to escape. There was also thought in the 60s to allow, let's ask that, why do you think Papa Doc was allowed from the 1950s all the way up, I think, to what? This is about the early 1980s. Why do you think that they were allowed to stay in power? To take millions of American dollars and to increase the debt that Haiti had already just tried to pay itself out of. Why do you think that was? Jay said he didn't know they were paying. A lot of people didn't. But it's here. The history of it is right there in our face. Haiti has just recently, within the last recent years, asked France to pay them the money that they paid, right, before the 1950s, to pay us all that money that we gave you that now you say was not democratic. You know what France said? HELL, no. So when you see reparations being argued here in America, Black folks saying, hey, pay us for slavery. Look at your Haitian brother. And they don't have anything. And the people who were put into place. Let me answer that question that I asked earlier. The reason why Duvalier and Papa Doc and his family was allowed to stay in power was because of Cuba, because of the Russians. Because when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, Divided said, hey, look, we're here. We could be a United States agent to spy and help you with Cuba. So Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, they sent millions, not billions, down to Haiti that went into the coffers of Papa Doc while his people starved. They knew that an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 people yearly, by some estimates, were being killed in Haiti. But they did nothing because they wanted to use Haiti as a spy against Cuba, not because of Cuba, but because of Russia. But then here we are in the 2020s, and we have a president who gets up here and says, well, those countries have always been S-hole countries. What is their worth? What do they do for people? Those people are savages. Mike said, weren't the Germans and the Japanese pay reparations? Yeah. Eventually, all are paid reparations. However, that I say that, but that doesn't seem to equate for people of color. And let's be real here, because history is subjective. History is subjective, ladies and gentlemen. What it is everybody becomes a villain at some point or a hindrance at some point. I'll give you an example. Mike makes a very good point here with the Germans and the Japanese. At one point, Woodrow Wilson said, right, that Germans cannot be just trusted. He created a commission, right? He said it wasn't necessarily his commission, right, to denigrate the Germans during World War I, right? When a lot of the beer makers here, the Bushes and stuff, had to close down their factories, right? It was also one of the pushes, arguably, to prohibition, right? So, because the Germans made a lot of money off of beer, but they were not to be trusted. They were savage. They were evil. And so many in the country attacked Germans. And that later led to the rise in Germany of Adolf Hitler. One of the things that Hitler talked about was how unfair treatment was to Germans. Same thing with the Japanese and with the Asians, period. Least we forget the 49ers, right? Least we forget our history on the 49ers and when they came over here and they blew them up, constructing our railroads. Or when they came over here doing the gold rush and they killed them to take their stakes and their properties. When they wrote laws that said that they don't have a right to own anything. And you had immigrant fighting immigrant. Everybody trying to be seen as the acceptable white. And I can't put that any other way. When I told you that Wilson waged a war that is not talked about in your history books, most people don't know that Woodrow Wilson waged a war against Russia. I guarantee you, most of you who have ever gone to public school can't tell me about what Woodrow Wilson did when he sent forces over to Murmansk, when he sent them Archangel, when he sent them to Vladivostok, Omsk. And if you're not military, you probably don't know these places, right? But Britain and France were in combination with them. And they used the Japanese as a footstool to help in the fight. And he did this because he wanted the white Russian forces. Because a lot of us don't also understand that Russia is a combination of cultures. But Wilson wanted white Russian forces to be able to control the government. He is the beginning of what we call the anti-communist government fighter that has went on through generations, and we're still hearing it now. Russians teach this in their history books. They talk about the American encroachment, and people here at home didn't want to fight. Somebody said, what about the 49ers? So a lot of us may not know, but what are the 49ers? I watch people, I don't watch sports as well as I used to, but I noticed that most people got mad with the Redskins, but they never got mad about the 49ers. But the 49ers wiped out indigenous people. This was during the gold rush, Mike. What they did is people came from all over the world, China, Japan, everywhere, to go try to find gold, to find wealth. But it was the people who were down there, Mexicans who were already been there, Spanish who had already been there for generations, were denied and stripped of their land after the 49ers. We'll get into that in another time, but it's a deep story. Paul Furnace, this even live. Paul, I'd like you to come on if you think that I'm yapping, but what I'm doing right now is probably giving you history that I don't think a lot of people know. So feel free to come on. Tyson, this is the first time I've heard of Woodrow Wilson sending troops. I think of him as income tax. Income tax. Well, we talked about this in the earlier Erudition Interactive, how the income tax played into a lot of the massacres too, because people felt that they were being, I don't have anything, and now you're trying to take the little that I have. They portray Woodrow Wilson as this figure who helped out a lot, but Woodrow Wilson pushed segregation in the armed forces and the government. Woodrow Wilson invigorated the idea of the Klan. As a matter of fact, William Simmons, when he formed the Second Klan, it is not just coinky dink that he did it post Woodrow Wilson's influence on America. Segregation, black codes, a lot of these things were placed into full-on governmental backing during the Wilson administration. I definitely didn't know about the 49ers. Yeah, we'd have to do a show on that. It's deep. Or go in. I'll tell you what I will do after the show. I will give references, sources that you can go in and read and see this. I guess Paul was just a troll and didn't want to come in. I'm always open to debate and to discussion. And we got about 10 more minutes left. So if any of you all want to come on, if you want to just say something or whatever, hey, like I said, I think I'll post that in here again just in case. There you go. But what's the point of this, of today's lesson? Today's lesson really is to talk to us about what we think we know. One of the books, I don't know if I have it over here. One of my son's old history books. I was looking through all of this stuff about Woodrow Wilson, man, the other night, because I wanted to look and see just what they had said about this man. And I was amazed because most history books only give a certain amount of time to presidents. I mean, quite literally like 3 pages or something like that. But Wilson had an unprecedented 15 pages. And when they talked about him, right, the only thing they really focused on was like what Tyson said, right? They talked about the laws, the things that he did, income tax, right? They talked about the League of Nations idea. But do you know that when the League of Nations idea was being discussed, that Wilson, there was an amendment that came up that said, hey, we want to have people to have free and unhampered opinions in it. And Wilson voted down the idea of having certain countries to be able to speak for themselves. Think about that. I'm telling you that I want everybody to be together, but then I only want some people to have an opinion. And that's something that we have to understand about what we're talking about today with the Haitians. The wealth that was generated that they have not forgotten. And I always feel, it's just me, not saying it's based on any history belief, that there's something there. There's something there. Something maybe we don't know, but because if you look at Hispaniola, if you look back and look at Columbus, you look at everything that all of these folks who wanted to control that area. When you think about the folks who were wiped out on the island of Haiti, on Hispaniola, for what? What is really going on? What is there? And they keep telling us that it's nothing, but they didn't tell them it was nothing as they kept pulling resources and things out of it. Philip said, I'm going to have to catch this from the beginning. I wanted to touch on a lot of this today because, quite honestly, I get tired of people saying things about our history, or as that gentleman got on here and said, thinking that we're ranting and raving when they don't know the history themselves. They told us that they sent troops. Wilson, I'll close by saying, when Wilson sent people down there to Haiti, and they invaded that country in 1915, they forced those people to rewrite their legislature. And when Haitians refused to declare war on Germany because it was the beginning of World War I, America, who had taken on the debt of Haiti, dissolved the Haitian legislature. Before that, Haitians were able to own their own properties, and they forced those people back into servitude, pseudo-slavery. They created a constitution that took away rights, and they basically put them into poverty for the betterment of America. That's historical fact, ladies and gentlemen. These people had what you hear all these people say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Ever since the Haitian Revolution, Haitians at that time owned their own properties, land. And after the American intervention, they were put on large plantations. There's evidence and there's writing about Marines coming down there and American troops forcing Haitians to work on road construction crews, to work on sharecropping plantations. And we know that to be the case because around 1918, 1919, they rose up in revolution, and thousands of Haitians and some Marines died in what we call these banana wars. But they said that this was because Wilson felt he had to stabilize these countries. There was I'm gonna pull that quote. There was a quote from a Marine I pulled the other day when I was thinking about that part, when he said he felt conflicted and said practically indiscriminate killing of natives has gone on for quite some time with no looking to seem as if it's going to stop. And he thought it was the most violent episode that he had ever seen in his time in the Marine Corps. But that history we don't know. But America's supposed to be the country that every country looks up to. Yeah, it can be. Brother Eddie, we need people like you. Let us know things to study about our history that don't normally think about. That's what I try to do, brother, every time. Tony Briscoe, I am not detailing CRT, but it would seem teaching the truth is the biggest threat to American power structure. People don't want lies to be uncovered because it would lift the veil of American evangelicals and the hypocrisy of the foundation that built a nation. It's not birth of a nation, it's curse of a nation. Lies will not bring healing, it would only bring doom. Brother, it's not just a rant, that's truth. That's something for a Marine to say. Yes. Yes. Mike, we definitely have to do another where we debunk a lot of these false myths about, Mike, you bring up a really good point here, and you and Tyson. I'm often I'm included with so many Black history groups. Recently, I was making fun because my wife had told me I need to take a break from social media. But I get a lot of things that come in all the time, and I get mad because this is what we do, my brothers and sisters, all colors, cultures. We tell a thing about history, and we don't source it. We don't reference it. We don't supply anything to show the truth of it. And what I always try to do, any show I've ever been on, anybody I've ever talked to, I always give you something to read. Because, see, we learned, right, visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, right, by reading. And so to reinforce, like everything I said here today, I give you something to go look up, to go read, to go invest time. And most times, I try to find a place where you can get it for free. Because knowledge is out there. But you have to be kind of directed sometimes. And I think that that's what historians and academics should be doing. If you read something and you say, man, this is great source material, give it to the people. Don't give them a meme that says somebody fought this war and tell them a half truth. We're not here to learn half truth. I'm giving you this so that you can grow. I'm telling you this so you can know. It's the poet in me. But that's what we have to do. No, we haven't. I touched a little bit of critical race theory recently. I think Mike is trying to get a group together to talk about it, and I look forward to that. Speaking of sharecropping, convict leasing is coming back. Yes, in a huge way today. I was reading an article after seeing a meme saying you can't lease people. That's called slavery. I'll send you. Tyson, I actually saw that recently. And I commented on it on my Facebook, and I thought I put it in the Erudition Network's page. because I took a lot of time a couple of weeks ago going over the convict lease system. And that's the reason why I covered it. Manifest destiny. Yes. Yeah, that lie. That old Monroe doctrine. That manifest destiny is another reason behind that 49ers massacre. History. But who is he? We're doing a show on 27 about critical race theory. Still looking for people. Yep. It is alive and well. Yeah, we know it was CRT, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been about an hour. I know some of you will have to go back and restart to watch some of it. This is the beginning of an unpackaging, because we're going to have to go now and see how this Haitian thing, this idea of the wealth of it, and South America's, how that plays into where we are right now. I hope tonight, that you were provided with some history that you didn't know. And I ask you, like I ask every week, get other people involved. I struggle sometimes because I want everyone to learn, but I know I can't reach everyone. We are trying to do something different here. I'm not about memes. You won't see 50 memes from Erudition. I'm about you actually having material. I'm about providing material for you and your progeny and your family to learn about who we are and where we come from. My family is heavily involved with trying to help out with Erudition. I see my mom here every week, and my mama comments, and I so appreciate it. Keep teaching, son. There are always going to be negative people that are lazy to learn their history. Truth. But we got to encourage those who do want to and just don't know where to go. I'm going to close this by talking about Pastor Razor. Pastor Razor sent the thing to me recently and said he has had to read more books than he ever has had to in quite some time. And I got reading material for you. I listen to books. I read all the time. I have to. It's just me. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not saying everybody's an avid reader. Get you an Audible. There are ways. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to close out. I want to say thank you again for coming on. And I guess nobody wanted to talk. We had somebody came on and made a comment, but I guess he left. I don't worry about it. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on and spending time with me for Erudition Network. I am Eddie Phillips. I will drop some source material and references on some of the things that we talked about. For Mike, I'm going to hit you with some stuff on the 49ers. I promise that we may do an episode on that, because that's an interesting history too, about the basically wiping out of indigenous people. But until then, thank you. God bless you. And I will see you all next week. Have a good one.